All right, welcome back. This is part 3, the final part of our training on Socratic seminars. And here we'll go over some roles that you might invite students to play within the seminar and do kind of an example of one seminar that I used to like to run. So, without further ado here, role number 1, facilitator. This is the discussion leader. They guide the flow of the seminar by asking open-ended questions, keeping the momentum, driving the participants toward that understanding that we talked about at the start. This person should have an eye for who's doing the speaking and keep inviting more students to participate and keeping the discussion focused on the topic at hand. I think definitely at the start of the year, this should be a role only played by the teacher. Maybe halfway through the year, 3/4 of the way through the year, when students have really adopted those norms. And if you have maybe a particular class who's really strong and has wonderful, excellent discussions, you could think about asking a student leader to take this on. But pro tip here, if you have a student facilitator, you're still going to want to give them a list of discussion stems and possible follow-up questions, because they need to know that destination that you have in mind, where you want your students to get. What are those critical understandings that they need to be in possession of? Okay, role 2, textual analyst. They are going to cite specific passages from the text and prompt their peers to interpret or evaluate those passages. If you have strong readers, this is a great role for them. They need to read and comprehend the text beforehand and understand which passages are going to be important to talk about. And so make sure you choose a student with excellent reading comprehension for this role. Have them prepare just 2 or 3 key excerpts before the seminar begins. A third role, the connector. They draw connections between the text and real-world events, personal experiences, or other works of literature that you've already read this year. It's best for students who think globally or have a strong grasp of current events. Encourage them to reference those current articles or draw historical parallels during the conversation. And they'll, of course, need time to prepare that and think about that in advance. It's worth noting that although I'm going to go over 10 roles here, you don't need to use all 10 every time. Sometimes maybe you just want to choose 5 different roles and let everybody else do whatever they want and say what they want during the discussion. That's up to you. Okay, next up, role number 4. This is the questioner or the clarifier. This student is going to ask clarifying or probing questions that deepen the discussion, refocus vague responses, keep things moving forward. This is best for curious thinkers, or maybe a student who isn't ready to make claims yet, but they are active listeners. Make sure you prepare them in advance with lots of question stems that they can bring to bear during the seminar itself. Role number 5, I always have one student play the devil's advocate. Remember that key foundational element of the Socratic method is challenging perspectives. We want our students to consider their own understandings. And if we're never confronting them, if we're never asking questions that challenge those popular viewpoints, then are we really employing the Socratic method? And so assigning that task to one student in particular and making sure that one bold thinker, that one student who's unafraid to debate, comes to your seminar sort of preloaded with those challenging questions, I think it's going to invite that sort of dialogue that you want to be happening. You need to teach everybody, not just the devil's advocate, but everybody, on how to keep their role constructive and not just confrontational. Give them sentence stems like, I respectfully disagree because, instead of just sort of attacking each other. Summarizer, synthesizer, periodically pauses the conversation to summarize key points, agreements, or unresolved questions. If you've got strong listeners who take good notes, this is a great role for them. Allow them to share their insights halfway through. Ask your timekeeper or the facilitator to pause the seminar and allow the summarizer to catch everybody up, get everybody up to speed. Equity monitor, participation tracker. This student's going to keep track of who speaks, how often, so that you get more participation from a broader range. I would try to find a student who maybe I can tell is a little reluctant, or I know this student is shy. This is a good role that kind of serves as an icebreaker for them to this process. Give them a checklist or a tally sheet, or your seating chart, or your whatever role tracker sheet you use, so that they can track individual turns. Number 8, note taker, recorder. This is an important one. They're going to record all the major arguments, the key ideas, important questions that get raised during the discussion. And I think it's best for students who have good handwriting, frankly. You want to collect their notes at the end and then use them for that post-seminar synthesis or whatever writing task is going to come next. Number 9, the timekeeper. I always had this student sit right next to either myself or another facilitator, whoever's quarterbacking the seminar, because a Socratic seminar is so highly structured, keeping accurate time and keeping segments moving and groups rotating at the right time is really important. And having them sit next to each other, they work hand in glove together to make sure you're going to get where you need to go by the time you need to get there. Lastly, all the other students play this role. If it's a fishbowl or an inner outer circle, you're going to have a lot of observers or evaluators. These students are going to watch the discussion to assess group dynamics, use of logic, collaboration, and use of text-based evidence. Make sure you give them a rubric or some sort of form that they fill out to keep them busy and keep them engaged. Some general tips. I like to use these name tents for the roles, and they sit on the desk in front of that student. Have one prepared for whatever role so that everyone knows who everyone is during the debate. You can rotate these roles. You don't need to have the same students being the note taker, the timekeeper every single time. In fact, it's best if everyone gets a broad range of experiences as you have these seminars throughout the year. And lastly, the debrief after the seminar is every bit as important as the seminar itself. These seminars themselves are a host of skills. And if we're not taking the time to assess a student's progress with these skills, well, they're not going to be building skills. They're not going to be leveling up, so to speak. And so taking the time after the seminar is over to have your observers get with their partners and go over what went well and what they could do better, well, they're not going to do better in the future. So that's really important. Here's an example of a seminar that I used to run. I would project this exact slide on the board. This was one that I used back when I taught poetry during a creative writing elective that I did for a few years. I would project the poem on the right, and then on the left I would have these sentence stems for academic discussion posted. And this is really important at the start of the year when they're just gaining this fluency. Leaving that projected somewhere prominent where students can always be referring back to it is really important. But in this example, the day before, I would hand out this poem, an untitled poem, to students, and they would read this poem and they would have to title it for themselves. They'd come up with what they thought the poem title was. And then they come prepared to the seminar to defend their choice of its title. And it was a 3-round Socratic seminar. The first round, we'd go around and students would discuss what they thought the title was and why, and they would constantly refer back to the text and challenge each other. And then after about 6-7 minutes, I would reveal that the title of this poem is actually Mushrooms. And then they would have a second round where they set to the task of discussing, well, what is the evidence in the text? How does this change our understanding, having revealed that the title of this poem is Mushrooms? And we go another 6-7 minutes looking at that. And then we'd wrap that round up and do one final round where I would reveal that the author of the poem is Sylvia Plath. And before we would start round 3 of the Socratic seminar, we'd pause and read a short bio about Sylvia Plath, how she was an American poet, novelist, short story writer. We learn a little bit about her sort of difficult struggles that she had with depression, anxiety, her reluctance to adopt sort of those 1950s expectations of domesticity and her role as a housewife, and how she became kind of a proto-feminist icon for second wave feminism, and how she kind of gave voice to the inner lives of women who were struggling with those things in a time when it wasn't copacetic to bring them up. And once they had a little bit of bio about Sylvia Plath and they understood her as a writer, round 3, we would re-examine Mushrooms through that lens. And we would ask them to, as a facilitator, I would guide them through this discussion, asking them probing questions about, well, look here in stanza 3. How do you think stanza 3 relates to Sylvia Plath? Or how does your understanding of, stanza 5, line 22, change in light of this knowledge that Sylvia Plath wrote this poem? What are the mushrooms a metaphor for? Questions like that. And in the end, I have gotten my students to a place of understanding. Well, I've gotten them to the end of my roadmap, right? We've reached the destination together. They unpack the Socratic seminar norms. They understand the importance of perspective taking when they're reading literature. We looked at that text through their own personal lens and what that text meant to them. We took a textual perspective when we revealed the title. We examined the text through the author's perspective, and that changed their understanding. And all of that was what I wanted them doing. We examined symbolism and metaphor and themes of second wave feminism in this process. And those were those critical understandings that I wanted them to have. But most importantly, I wasn't teaching all this stuff at them. I was guiding them using the Socratic method through the vehicle of the seminar. Well, I hope you all will employ either the Socratic method or even the Socratic seminars out there in your classes. And if you have any questions about this, or you want my roll sheets or any of the guides, please stop by and see me anytime. I'm happy to talk more about this. I'm passionate about this subject. So, thanks, everybody. Thanks.